Cameron, you're an adult today. There's no little kid of you.
I look presentable today, so.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah. I mean, I think everybody is in their pajamas 90% of the time now. So how was everybody? How was your week beginning? One thumbs up, a smile or two, and the rest of the people feel like I do. Lexi, I think I have that same mug. Is that a German mug with the writing on the bottom? Does it have this sort of like rough clay writing?
Yeah.
I love those mugs.
Oh my God,
I find it interesting that you have the heartless one. That's the house mug. The Gregory House. If you watch the show, that's the exact mug he uses, is that one.
No way.
I've had it since I was a little kid. I got it for Christmas when I was like 6 or something. I got a little mug set. But there are 4 mugs. One of them has a huge heart on it. One of them has like 100 hearts, little tiny hearts all over it. One of them has 6 hearts, 6 like medium-sized hearts, and one of them is heartless. You have the heartless one.
You know what's funny is I remember you telling us about that, how you had the mug from the show and the collection, but I didn't realize till now that
you have the exact same one.
Yeah, like
yeah.
I don't know, I just thought like, oh, it's our German mugs, you know, like I just didn't think much of it. That's cool. I'll have to tell my mom though, because I don't know if she knows.
Yeah, that's the same one that every single episode that the mug, he doesn't like change his mug through 8 seasons or whatever it is. It's the same one. And you're drinking out of it today. Okay, let me pull up the slides.
Do you still have that peach mug?
No, I don't know. I have no idea what happened to it. I left it in the. I assume it's going to be returned to me someday. But it was the mug that I used every single everything. I ate my cereal or whatever out of it. I soup came out of the peach mug. Like every single thing that I ate came out of that peach mug. And then sometimes I just leave it in 118, and then one time it was gone. There was one time that there's a couple of times students like hid it. They're like, I'm like, where is my mug? And it was hidden. And one time somebody washed it for me, and then one time it was just gone forever. And so someday, maybe I'll see it again. Yeah, that was my go-to mug. Okay, we are at number 10. Same as always. Here, let me pull up the chat box. Same as always. Interrupt me if you feel like talking. I'll be happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you have some, even if it's just loosely physiological or even just philosophical, or type something in the chat box. Otherwise, I'll just monologue for a while, and then the while will expire, and we'll talk again. So we'll finish up physical inactivity and disuse atrophy. We'll just touch on disuse atrophy a little bit as we go through. Everyone knows what this is, and we can talk about the mechanisms of this. It's AMPK, FOXO and ULK1, and you're looking at protein degradation, stuff like that, ubiquitin proteasome system. We can talk about the mechanisms if you want. I don't have that in this particular lecture. I just talk about sort of the time course and consequences, things like that. But all of this, I will, as Nathaniel suggested, I will make the checklist available at some point, but it's just going to keep growing. The checklist is just going to keep growing as we go. But remember, adaptation is just super expensive. We have genetic ceilings, and specificity of adaptation is just the governing rule of everything. Even outside of cells, everything in your tissue is constantly adapting to the specific profile of stress, profile of loads, and we have all these proteins that are going to do it. There's an amount of stress that is relevant, that matters, characteristics of that stress matter, all of the summation points. We come from our environments, right? We're just a bunch of dorsal fins. And everyone shows up with back pain and neck pain and hip problems and ankles and knees and just filled with problems. What did those problems come from? Inappropriate loads. Yeah, there were or excess loads. Maybe that's a form of inappropriate loads. It could have been the best possible form and the safest loads, but just too much of them, right? So inappropriate from a number of perspectives. So we're just a bunch of. Well, I'm going to bring this back today. We're gonna bring back, as we talk about atrophy, disuse atrophy. We're going to bring that concept back a little bit. But we do things in life. Everybody has different sports. Tennis is remarkably little like water polo. Does it involve limbs and a VO2 max and exertion and occasional grunting? Sure. Yeah. But that doesn't matter because general adaptation syndrome isn't a thing. So what's a thing is specificity. And so every single sport, every single activity you do, you're going to adapt differently. You're going to experience those stresses, experience those loads differently. And the response that we've known, this is from 1945, we've known that response is going to be different, whether it's cognitive, whether it's oxidative, whether it's anaerobic, whether it's motor skill, whatever it is, you're going to it's specific. And we have to be careful and thoughtful when we're coming up with exercise prescriptions. When we're telling other people what to do, sometimes a really sort of unsophisticated, kind of crude, unrefined way of doing things is just saying, well, on the surface, this makes sense, so I'm going to tell you what to do. The surface is a little bit misleading sometimes. And a lot of what's best, it can be a little bit counterintuitive until you think about it for a few minutes. Like, okay, I get it. I get the error here. Size principle, again, size principle is going to be one of the fundamental principles in stress physiology, because what tissues are being stressed? Oh, I exercise every single day. Yeah, but do you ever hit these ones? Okay, then that's like, a third of your body is just sleeping as you go through life. It's not doing anything. And so, the idea of how you subject stresses and to what tissues and what cells within a muscle group, how you apply stress. This stuff, more kind of Goldilocks, is different depending on your age. People, from epidemiological work, we know that people have different risks. You can't have even everyone in the class. You're going to be at a slightly different risk of cardiovascular events, or a slightly different risk of skeletal muscle pathology, a slightly different risk of overtraining. There's going to be different risks of everything, but especially when you start leaping decades in life, when you start working with older adults, man, they're going to have an accumulation of life experience and stress that, oh, well, I worked on, okay, Nathaniel oversees dock workers these days, and the people working on the dock, I've been doing this for 50 years. Okay, those tissues have 50 years of weird mechanical loading probably, and that's something to consider when you're working with people. So doing case studies, or even if it's an athlete, get to know that athlete. Don't just prescribe things to people as though everyone is the same. I mean, that's negligence. That's as malpractice-y as it gets. And so, all about overtraining. Just it's a bunch of hypothalamic control. It's just dysregulation. We get dysfunction of hypothalamic control. Then all of our hormones get weird. And think about people who say, just again, the simplicity that you hear in exercise science, or exercise physiology, kinesiology, whatever, all of these fields. People say really dumb things all the time. Well, it's calories in, calories out. That's not a thing. It sounds like it should be a thing, but that's not even close to a thing. When you look at weight loss programs and the reason that they are or aren't working, it's not because, oh, my Fitbit says I burned X amount of calories and I only ate this amount of calories. Okay, you're not considering hormonal problems, right? If you wind up with insulin sensitivity problems and you're eating the same number of calories and burning the same number of calories, you gain weight, right? So we're looking at hormone disruptions, or just get on, I don't know, prednisone, or take Depakote, or any of these drugs that are associated with weight gain and diet. It's not going to work nearly as well. Let's put it into even clearer perspective. Calories in, calories out. Does your tumor care? That's going to grow no matter what. Like, well, I ate 1,400 calories and I burn 1,900 calories, have a 500 calorie deficit. Why is the tumor bigger? So tissues don't give a shit about calories in, calories out. That's not how bodies work. That's how crude 80s slogans work. And to work with people, to be a practitioner, whether that's a coach, whether that's a doctor, whether that's a nutritionist, whether that's a physical therapist, you can't just have 80s slogans, right? Because then you're cheating people, right? You're just lying and stealing money. So, from the perspective of ethics, from stealing money as in you're cashing checks for a service you're not providing, you have to know things, and sometimes knowing things just takes a bunch of work, but it's worth it in the end. It's always worth it to know stuff, because then somebody comes to you. Let's say it's like your grandparent or a sibling or a client or patient or something comes to you, and what you say matters. What you say is therapeutic, or what you say optimizes their performance. It's not just like what you say is a bunch of hollow nonsense. And that's usually what you encounter. But what you contribute, all of you, to the world of exercise physiology or sport enhancement or therapeutic interventions, what you contribute should be meaningful, right? It should actually enhance lives and repair tissues and stuff. So when we get into topics like overtraining, I mean, this is so common and not necessarily let's say fully blown. I don't really know what that means. Like when people say full blown AIDS or whatever, like, oh, okay, what do you mean full blown? But overtraining, right? Full blown overtraining. Okay, maybe we're not quite at that level where your lives are ruined and careers are cut short by 10 years, but you are somewhere between that non-functional overreaching and the fully blown status of endocrine disruption that takes a year, 2 years, or a ridiculously long time to recover. We're seeing hypothalamic pituitary fill in the blank axis disruption, and especially the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, right? We're seeing that cortisol stress hormone, is that what everyone calls it? Glucocorticoid cortex cortisol stress hormone. It's a steroid hormone. So the gonads and the adrenal cortex, that's where your steroid hormones come from. This stuff. Selye was sort of the original researcher of stress responses and how that works. And in some contexts of overtraining syndrome, we see Selye's description of what's happening being replicated, but that's not really an adaptation. That's maladaptation. That is allostatic load, allostatic load, allostatic load. I don't get to go back down to base camp. I'm just at the top of the mountain all the time, and it's horrible up here, and I hate life. I hate it. I hate it. As hard, as hard, as hard, as heavy, it's heavy, it's heavy. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. I'm stressed. Okay, now your tissues and the hypothalamic pituitary whatever axes eventually throw in the towel, and that towel takes a long time to clean, to pick up. So with the Whitehall studies, just know Whitehall studies. You don't need to know the details of these things, but the premise is there's more to the picture than you can see. You take a Polaroid and you give it 5 seconds to develop. And like, oh, I see part of me, or oh, I'm starting. The picture's coming in here. Let me shake it a little bit. You don't wait 10 minutes, right? Just take the Polaroid. It comes out. It doesn't look like anything. You start to see a picture, and that's what we know today. Is the Polaroid has been developing for 1 second. The Whitehall says, here are some known unknowns and some unknown unknowns, some Rumsfeldian domains, and just the totem pole of the hierarchy of life. And what Ross said about if you are the intern, that's a bad place to be. Can you handle a marathon for a couple of hours? Sure. Can you handle jogging as long as Forrest Gump did? Here's the only unrealistic thing about that movie. Like, is that he ran for so long. If you've seen Forrest Gump, whatever that movie, that he ran for so long and didn't end up with weird endocrinological dysfunction, and which colored the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie was about his medical care and his inability to get out of bed. You can run a marathon. You can't run like 20 in a row and just keep going. And you need downtime. You need to. I mean, okay, there's like the ultra marathon, whatever. That okay. There's some people can handle that stuff, but even that. Right, just run back to back to back ultra marathons if you're like the one person in the world who can tolerate that stuff, and you will find yourself in overtraining too. Whitehall was saying, there's other stuff that just matters, and if you're an intern for longer than the duration of being an intern, you're looking at a shorter lifespan. You want to have a position in life where you have emotional control, where you have decision-making ability in the workplace, and you have control over your schedule, and you have like a support staff, and you're not just that you're not like being bossed around all the time. You want to have those things, otherwise it's horrible. And we're seeing these, and we don't quite know what happens, but there's probably endocrine disruption, because that's really the foundation of a lot of things in life. But this study, you don't need to know this study at all. I'm never gonna like ask about this, but just the idea of like mummy, like ancient populations. We are not. It's not like Marlboro and Kraft cheese and boxes of cereal are being consumed in excess. That's not what this was, and we're seeing a bunch of atherosclerosis in those populations. The cliche, what physical inactivity leads to, right? What we're talking about on Monday and today is like sitting is the new smoking. And when you run these epidemiological studies, this population-based surveillance, you're not intervening. There's no intervention at all. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to randomize you to this group, I'm going to randomize you to that group. Just, how many hours do you sit down a day? You can do this thing called the Paffenbarger questionnaire. And it's sort of outdated, but it says, I think it's from the 70s. It says, how many flights of stairs did you climb? How many city blocks did you walk? Like 12 blocks to the mile. You end up calculating this stuff later. Did you play frisbee today? Did you play pickup basketball? And what it just asks a bunch of questions about. It doesn't ask specifically about basketball. It just asks what sorts of activities, and those are the things you write down. And you try to figure out the amount of activity that people are doing, and then you can do these correlational studies and say, what effect does sedentary behavior have in this society and in this culture and this population and whatever? And it's like as bad as smoking. It's the sedentary activity of these long bouts of sitting, which brings us to this concept of nothing is not nothing. Nothing is an input. Nothing is a stressor, and it's a particularly bad one. Nothing is a pretty bad stressor that we're going to respond to. So you remember the psoas or the SOE when we were talking about that womb of the kidney stuff, and it connects to so many tissues. The psoas does, and so between your rib cage and your sternum, every vertebra that thing is connected to. It inserts on the lesser trochanter, same place as the iliacus, but they have different origins, and so they're totally different muscles. They have different functions, but these muscles depending on the stresses you apply to them, depending on the loads those muscles endure, they're going to adapt. If the load you're enduring is sitting, you're in that posture all the time. That is a weird posture. Sitting is a very weird posture. And just because it's socially sanctioned, right? Everywhere you go, there's a chair. Everywhere in life. In your kitchen, there's chairs, right? In your living room, there's chairs. And if you have like a dining room or whatever, there's chairs. And you go to a restaurant for somehow during the age of COVID, there's chairs. You go to a movie theater, there's chairs. You go to a classroom, there's chairs. You get in your car, there's chairs. You go to you go to the airport, and yeah, of course, there's chairs on an airplane. But why are there so many chairs leading up to the airplane? You're going to be sitting in a chair in an airplane for 6 hours or however long your flight is. Why does everybody sit down in a chair before walking onto the airplane and sitting in a chair? It's just that we accept that this is a normal behavior. And if you stand at the dinner table, people think you're crazy. And, if you stand during class and if you stand while driving, you're going to get pulled over. Go to the park, and what do people do? I'm going to sit on the park bench. Okay, another fucking chair, right? And so chairs are just what people do in life, but that doesn't mean it's healthful or not harmful. And from the perspective of we all love like a hearth fire. You sit down, or your beach fire. You roast marshmallows over the fire, or it's in your living room. You have like a wood burning fireplace, and you sit there and warm your hands. And I don't know, you're like 9 and you're telling ghost stories. Whatever it is, there's something sentimental about that experience. There's something seemingly wholesome about that experience. Is it wholesome? No, you're poisoning your lungs. You might as well just smoke a pack of cigarettes while you're sitting there. It's horrible for you. That shit is bad for you. And yet, how could it be bad? We cherish this. Same thing sitting, and there's so many of these behaviors that are just socially, not just sanctioned, they're socially expected. If you don't do it, or if you don't like it, or you don't participate, then you're the weird one. Well, technically, you're the healthy one, but healthy is weird, right? So healthful behaviors are sometimes looked upon with frowns and worry. You sort of furrow your brow in the direction of worry, if not frown, at people who are acknowledging what is objectively healthful and unhealthy, and practicing accordingly. Sitting, terrible for you. Again, you can go through the alphabet, and how bad is this going to get? Well, just infinity diseases are going to come from this. And yet, everywhere you go, you're going to find your chair. Go to the dentist and request that you stand. I'm going to stand up while you do this. I can kneel a little bit. I'll be in a squat position. Like, what? Get out of here. I'm not going to touch your teeth. Everywhere you go, there's just a chair. It won't surprise me when it's like elevators soon have chairs. Depends how long they go. So there's a lot of explanations, right? LPP1, stuff like this, when you're looking at the physiological, not just mechanical, not the length or opposition of forces of particular muscle groups. You sit in a chair, and certain things are in a contracted state and certain things are in an elongated state, and you're altering joint kinetics, or sort of the articulation of joints and how they're going to function, how they're going to produce force, gets altered. But there's also physiological explanations. And so earlier I said regulation is one of these critical domains of health. Is it heart disease? Is it diabetes? These are issues of regulation. These are regulation issues. Weight gain and weight loss. These are issues of regulation. Calories in, calories out. Okay, if it's 1642 outside, that sounds advanced, right? Because you know what a calorie is. That sounds like you know what you're talking about. In the age, I don't know, once you get into like the 1990s and stuff, if you say that, I don't know, like, it's so absurd, some of these things, and all of this is a little bit more sophisticated than the crude mathematical summary. Although that's the easiest thing you can say, that's not how it works. And so remember the LPP1, you just be mobile, walk around, don't sit down for prolonged periods, and you have this normal amount, right? So this is like a relative amount. And one, where we're going to say 100%, that's like normal. And then you just deplete this thing. And then we're having problems with regulation, inflammatory regulation, and clotting regulation. And exercise isn't the opposite, right? Exercise is not the opposite of not exercise. Yet we just sit and sit and sit and sit and sit, and that becomes us. We become, remember my little biography bit about we become the summation of our stresses. Our autobiography is a summation of all of our stresses and our loads that we endure year after year after year. And look at somebody who's, I don't know, surfer, and their lat spread is going to be pretty good from all that paddling. Maybe somebody who's a cyclist is going to have a little tiny upper body and big glutes or something. So you can look at what people do in a sport, and you can identify that sport's body. We become the literal embodiment, the physical form of the stresses that we endure. We take the form of those stresses. Now, getting into today's theme is we move to eat to live, right? This is, again, let's go back to James Levine, very famous, what I said, like the resurgencer, I think I called him, of this movement of movement, right? A movement of movement. This concept that human activity is vital to human health. He's the latest guy to really make a big deal about that. MD, PhD, big name. He's at Mayo Clinic. So he's connecting this idea of movement and eating. We move to eat to live. And so physical activity as nutrition. You remember Katie Bowman had that concept of physical activity as nutrition. And the load profile, you can't just get one thing. You can't do, well, I do nothing but concentric exercise, I do nothing but concentric bicep curls. Okay, you're not even going to live very long if that's all you're doing, right? I mean, the bed sores are going to get the best of you, so we have to have broad stresses, just as we need broad nutrition. But it goes a little bit further than that. So this idea of movement, physical activity, was the way we acquired sustenance. Again, we're not broccoli, we're not a fern, we are not a hydrangea. We have to, literally get off of our asses, stop sitting, and go acquire food. Food acquisition expends calories. Not really today. Today, you don't really need to, but historically, as our genomes were being assembled, that's how it worked. We needed to go be physically active, and then the result of that was calories. So these two were inextricable. These two were tangled, right? They were braided together and you couldn't unbraid them. Today, what we often do, what health conscious people will do, is they'll ingest food and then they'll go atone for their sins on the elliptical or on the treadmill, or with walks around the block. Postprandial exercise, we call it. Postprandial means post eating, post meal, post ingestion, post whatever. Postprandial exercise, it's like, I just ate, I just want to sit down, but I should try to work this off. And it works well because movement and eating are so indissoluble. They're so linked. You can't kind of remove one from the next in your insides, in your body. But again, we use it today to right our wrongs, and that's not really how it should exist. It's the headphones. Anybody who has, just mine right now. There's so many. If you can see my screen, I can't see anybody's screen, but if you can see mine, it's just these knots that I don't want to even bother trying to undo. Just all my headphone cords look like this, and how the hell do you? So Ansel Keys, we're going to talk about what starvation looks like on the body in just a minute, and linking movement and nutrition, taking a look at how movement and nutrition, how this relationship reveals itself in the presence of starvation. But what Ansel Keys got famous for, here's the cover of him on the cover of Time magazine with a heart, with a badly drawn heart behind him. And what he got famous for is the 7 countries study. And this thing began in the 50s, the late 50s, 56, 58, something like that is when it began, and started publishing. Really 1970s, the publications on this started coming out. And it was the first, at least major, international epidemiological investigation, the first major worldwide population-based study. And there were these 7 countries picked, and sort of found that, saturated fat was bad for cardiovascular disease. He's evaluating these different risk factors for coronary artery disease, and that's where the coinage of the Mediterranean diet. Oh, this thing seems to be a little bit healthier. In the 21st century, there's a lot of criticism for this. Tons of books come out, and I guess I don't even remember this one. I think I did that one, but this one was okay. This one was great. This one is unmemorable. Maybe it's good. I don't know. I don't remember it. It's in my Audible account, and I don't remember where it says. But the 21st century criticism of the 7 country study is now the popular position, and I criticize it too, because a lot of bold claims are coming out about this, and this is where all of those claims about fat is the enemy, fat is bad, are really where these stem from. But it's not true, and this study didn't even find that. It takes a lot of distortion of the data and distortion of how it was even reported, how the findings were reported, to say fat is bad. And so it never really said fat is the enemy and carbs should replace it. That's the advice that we all give. That's sort of the colloquial take on all this, but that's not really what the study found. Still, by way of distortion, that's where we got. That's what everyone sort of came to believe. And when a lot more controlled data, again, I don't really like the 7 countries study. The Ansel Keys study that came before it, I like a lot better. But the 7 country study is very important. It is a massive epidemiological study that had great importance. And is it still relevant today? That's what this article is. Yeah, can we still, from 2018, can we still learn from the 7 country study? And well, we have to take it with some grains of sand and salt and whatever other is granular in your life. Important study, but you fast forward the world. I don't know, I can't read that date. Was that 2004 or something? I can't read that, whatever date it is, but just fast forward quite a while, and we're seeing eat butter on the cover of the same magazine. And now I side more with this, right? I mean, I put butter in my coffee, ghee in my coffee, but controlled data has something to say that epidemiological surveillance does not. Now, Ansel Keys, his less famous study, before he was famous, he did his Minnesota starvation experiment, where he took college-aged conscientious objectors. This just means there's a draft and you aren't going to do it. You're a pacifist, you're whatever, you refuse to fight. And so I mean, this is World War II, 1939, 1945, this era. So he's doing this in 1944, so at the tail end of World War II. And these conscientious objectors, these are his subjects. And there was phase 1 was 12 weeks of controlled feeding, essentially normal. Let's get everybody as normal as possible in phase 1, 12 weeks. So if anybody's doing anything weird for the last little while, that's not going to affect our results, right? We want to normalize everybody. We want standardized nutrition, just normalize everybody. Now, body to body, there's going to be differences. Everybody has different insulin sensitivity. Everybody has a different history of exercise. Everybody has, which we'll talk about in a little bit, everybody has different sort of jittery tendencies, and you just get fidgety. Some people walk more, so everybody is a little bit different. But let's normalize as much as we can. Phase 1. Phase 2 is 24 weeks, twice as long, of starvation. Now, starvation doesn't mean no calories. They got a little bit of macaroni. They got some rutabagas. They got some turnips. They got some potatoes. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, Samwise Gamgee, and there was some food that they were given. The calories were restricted, but then they also, so they walked a lot, right? It's just a lot of physical activity, sort of insisting that people get movement in, and really reduced calories. Now, following phase 2, they did refeeding, and they watched what happened to people. It would be difficult to run this experiment today, given that these are subjects, and look at them. I mean, this is on the subject of Lord of the Rings. I mean, that's like skinnier than Gollum. And these are 3. This is a photograph from the Minnesota starvation experiment, and there's a caption that says, like, it names the people and says they're relaxing in the sunlight. Members of the Minnesota starvation study, and like, yeah, but like that guy's calf is the same size as everyone else's like forearm. These people get slender, but early in starvation, very early in this starvation period, people get fidgety. They start twitching. They get very, very fidgety. What's called an initial frenetic surge, which just means you're a little bit jumpy, uncontrolled, energetic. You're a little bit wild and fast, right? So this surge that promotes food acquisition. Now, you have hormones like ghrelin, GHR, growth hormone releasing ghrelin, that's going to be released from your gastrointestinal tract. And when this happens, in the absence of food, you're going to release ghrelin. You're going to get fidgety. You're going to go try to get food, right? Because if you are starving, you're en route to death via dearth. If you just get really sedated at that point, you're just going to die, right? You're not going to go get food. What happens if you don't go get food? Well, you need it. And so you're going to die. So early on in periods of fasting, famine, starvation, you're going to get this physical activity surge. Later on, you're going to get as sluggish as they come. Yeah, you'll have never slept so well. You might sleep poorly, but you'll have never been so loungy. Your RPMs idle at minimum. The engine's going to die if the RPM go down any farther. And so that's really what happens during stage later in stage 2. So again, we move to eat to live. When we deny ourselves food, we move more. We start moving so we can go get food. When we eat a bunch of food, that's a signal that, it's okay to sit down, right? What happens at Thanksgiving? When you go sit down on the sofa and lounge a little and fall asleep. And so these two things are really connected: our movement and the incentive to do so, and our nutrition and what that nutrition is doing inside of us. Depending on how we're moving, it affects how we process those calories. And the results were eventually published, right? Almost 1,400 pages in 2 volumes. And there are descriptions of all the work if you care to read, what he found. But movement in general, right? Here's a little baby dancing. Now, why is this little baby, this little adorable creature, why is it dancing? Right now, why is any of this stuff happening? Why are any of these little tiny humanoid creatures behaving in this way? Motor learning, right? Motor learning. You're going to have to learn at some point, usually in youth. If you're an adult learning an instrument or something, that's one thing. But when you move, you have afferent information that you receive about that action. And you can start mapping in how this stuff works, right? You can start understanding. Yeah, you have a primary motor cortex, and You have a premotor and supplementary motor area, and you have all these brain regions that are going to figure out how to move, how to map movements, how to turn afferent information into appropriate movements, how to do sort of chunking of all of your movements. And the primary motor cortex, that's the main area where you're actually controlling voluntary activation, where that's born. But the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex and posterior parietal complex. And there's all these different brain areas that are also involved in all of this. But this spontaneous motion, it starts with fetuses. You're not even like out of the, like log slide, like birth canal thing yet. And you're not even out of that yet. And you're already doing these motions, and your brain, your motor cortex is learning what that means and being able to reflect on what just happened and movement is so important. The most ridiculous looking little child movement is not a waste of energy. It's not a seizure. It's not a waste of energy. It's stimuli that's needed for tissues to develop, for function to develop. Now, there's an actual, container baby syndrome, or bucket baby is what they call it, where, the American Physical Therapy Association is not going to call it bucket baby, but kids they're always sitting in car seats and strollers, and there's just all of these little chairs that if babies are sitting in that thing too much, they don't get that motion, they don't get the afferent information, uh, coloring the capacity to move and understanding how movement happens, and sort of mastering motion. They don't get it, that kinesthetic awareness. Now, as you go from birth, right here, you're like dancing the little weird movements, and learning to crawl. Right, as we go through life, we take on different stresses, different loads, different motions, where our movement profile changes. Right, eventually you put on a backpack, that's going to change your load. Now your center of mass is going to move back a little bit. Well, what does that do to your abs, and how is your low back affected? And then whatever, you graduate, and you're very tall when you graduate. You rob a bank over here. Yeah, everyone gets back pain. We hobble, and our legs get weirdly, wobbly, and so we learn to our last great activity in life is levitation, and then we die. And throughout life, our stressors, our loads change and change and change and change, but they become more and more and more and more deliberate. Over here, we're like clumsy, and we have no idea what we're doing, and we're learning how to grab things and hold things and walk. It takes a long time to learn how to walk. We're doing all that stuff. Over here, this person is very mobile. Despite his absence of joints, he's very mobile. And that person, all of his actions are deliberate. Now watch somebody play, like give your parents a Nintendo Wii, like the old system, right? Give that, it's just weird to call that the old system, but give them a Nintendo Wii and say, let's play Wii tennis together. And watch them swing the racket, not as athletically as, Ross and Liam, but with as much motion as Ross and Liam would on a court. And then when you learn how to play the game, like it just goes, you move it a centimeter, and like that's the best hit you can do, is you move the thing a centimeter, and you're sitting down, moving it a centimeter, and you're much better. So we sort of minimize, we become so much more efficient in all of our motions. Our motions are very deliberate, but what we need in life is not the flick of the wrist. What we need is that full tennis swing. And don't you eat until you've done it, right? We need that full tennis swing. And I'll go through some specific mechanisms, but like non-insulin dependent glucose uptake, right? So postprandial exercise becomes a prescription. Somebody's on a weight loss diet. I'm doing the Jenny Craig, or I'm doing whatever it is, Weight Watchers or something like that. And you get a personal trainer, it's a nutritionist you go to, whatever it is, wherever you get your advice. Postprandial exercise, big, big topic. And it doesn't take that much. A 15-minute casual stroll for middle-aged women was sufficient to reduce blood glucose, to reduce the spike in blood glucose. What does it say? I have a meeting in 15 minutes. I'm not going to that meeting. So um, this idea of postprandial exercise is important. But why is it important? Well, because we don't get enough exercise in life. You wouldn't need that if you had gone to acquire your food. Now, my favorite artist, a visual artist, is Rene Magritte. He's a Belgian surrealist, and he died in 1967. Or somewhere thereabouts, and that's when this thing was made, and he didn't live long enough to see it. He made like the wax thing is from one of his paintings and stuff, but the healer is a bronze thing. The healer is what this is called, the healer, and it's a caged animal, right? You do not heal when caged. You do not heal, or at least you heal really poorly, when casted. Right? When put in a cast, you heal poorly. When in a cage, you heal poorly. You need mechanical loading, right? You need mechanical loading to send the metabolic signals for tissue adaptation. And so sort of a misnomer on who I think is, the best artist. But we need movement for health. We need movement for tissues to be maintained, for progress, to ward off diseases of sedentary behavior. Now, what happens in life, we get all this urgency from things. Now, the bear roars. And what happens when the bear roars? Well, we get the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. We get the sympathoadrenal medullary axis. We're getting a bunch of epinephrine. We're getting a bunch of cortisol. And then we sit our asses down and take a test or something. We sit down and crunch numbers. We sit down and write an email. We sit down and think about all of this stuff. We're not using all of those calories. So a bachelor's degree, let's say the bear goes to school and graduates. A bachelor's degree, okay, there's 4 years. Master's, another 2, unless you're really hasty, right? PhD, another 5 after that. Credit card debt and the student loans and all this. Okay, I don't know, 10, 20 years of paying. We just sit and stew and stress through all of it, and very little of it is a roaring bear emergency. But we don't really know how to deal with contemporary stresses. We're very good at dealing with sort of Stone Age stresses, Space Age stresses. We're not equipped to deal with that stuff. So we just sit down looking nothing like this person, but except for the posture. None of us has this, big pink backpack and stuff. So Liam Neeson, I think everybody knows who Liam Neeson is, and everybody knows this line. Oh, it's kind of long. We're gonna play the whole thing though.
I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you're looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have money. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills.
Okay, I guess we're not going to do the whole thing. You get it. So this is Liam Neeson talking also, but this is him in real life. This isn't him in a movie. This is Liam Neeson used to be a teacher in his human real form, not actor. There were always discipline problems, getting them to settle down before you start to teach them. This particular kid. So he goes on. I'm not going to do that whole thing because there'll be a coughing and stuff. This particular kid did not want to settle down. He wanted to disrupt the whole class. So I went over to him and I asked him to leave the classroom and stand outside. The next thing, he pulled a knife on me. My reaction was to punch him. He punched a fucking kid. He's a teacher and he punches a kid. So he stopped being a teacher, I think, at that point, because you don't really get to do that. And stress and stress responses, right? What we do when we get stressed out, we don't punch the people. What we do is we sit and stew, right? We lie in bed, unable to sleep, stewing, and we write angry emails and we complain to a spouse or whatever. We sit and we stew. Now, I pass out an exam or whatever, and you just sit there, right? Sometimes we're going to go exercise. Sometimes we go exercise off these stresses. But like 15%, 16%, something like that of people have uh, a gym. And University of Leicester, this professors, people convince themselves that they are living a healthy lifestyle, doing their 30 minutes of exercise a day, but they need to think about the other 23.5 hours. So I mean, just think about everything else that you could do. Like, okay, you're smoking all the time. If you're being sedentary all day long and you exercise for 30 minutes, let's say you're smoking for 23 hours, and then just 1 hour a day, like, you know what, I'm going to get the air purifier and I'm just going to blow it right in my face, and I'm going to do deep yoga breathing in front of the purifier. Okay, you're still going to get lung cancer. That who cares that you did that for an hour? Right? The other 23 hours were terrible for you. And so you have to consider those sorts of behaviors. It's not just LPP1, it's like everything. And there are three ways to burn calories to be physically active. There's basal metabolic rate, right? You got to stay alive. There's a thermic effect of food. Okay, the thermic effect of food means you eat, especially eat something like a steak. The steak can be cold and you're going to start sweating, right? The meat sweats, they say. That's the thermic effect of food. It's going to burn a bunch of calories. And anytime you're burning calories, we're going to talk about heat accumulation and heat dissipation and thermal transfer. We're going to talk about all that kind of soon, about how the body copes with heat. But eating, you're going to produce some. But activity thermogenesis, this is the big one. Activity thermogenesis, this is the big, I don't know, basal metabolism is a big one, but activity thermogenesis is the one that you can really control a lot, and where you see a lot of variance between people. Most people aren't exercising, right? This citation says 16%, but let's say it's 15%, a 16%, somewhere. It's fewer than 1 out of 5. It's 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7, something like that, of people belong to a health club. And just like, here's smoking. Here's Barbara Ainsworth's. Here's her compendium. Met values 1.3. You're sitting here on the tower. There's your little cigarette, and that's about a 30% boost. 1.3 times your resting metabolism. That's a 30% boost. Now in 2001, sitting and smoking was rated as basal metabolism. In 2011, they said, well, okay, there's something going on. Maybe it's a 30% boost in your metabolism. It's probably the real value might be like 10%, something like that. So between 2001 and 2011 values is probably where it's going to fall. So this one's saying, probably less than acute smoking, probably less than 10% boost, and it's only going to last for half an hour tops. Let's look at a bunch of different studies, and here's a 10% boost, here's a 5% boost, here's a 2.5, a 6.5. When you look at like the 0 and the negative, it's okay. The resting metabolic rate assessment delayed until 25 to 30 minutes after smoking. Okay, well, yeah, you don't expect anything. But while you're smoking, sure, I don't know, maybe get a 10% boost, something like that. But we're doing sedentary things, and just smoking. There's an appetite suppressant. People do lose weight when they're smoking, but it's not because of much calorie burnage. But if you're fidgeting with your upper body, some people like twirl pencils, right? They like twirl a pen or a pencil or something. And other people, they fidget with their legs. They just like pump their knee the whole time they're doing something. And so if you're pumping your legs have more muscle. I don't know, maybe you get like an 80% boost in your metabolism. Maybe if you're fidgeting with your hands, maybe that's like a 50% boost in your metabolism. And if you're just a sitting activity, we are playing piano, somehow that's a bigger boost than organ. Playing a woodwind, somehow that's smaller than piano. Maybe there's just less arm activity there. Laughing, you think there'd be a little bit of a boost there with all that ab work. You're in a whirlpool sitting, and you're playing cards. I mean, this is just your basal metabolism. 1 is you lying there. 2 is double that, where you're fishing from a boat or a canoe or whatever. But all you have to do is stand up. just stand up, and suddenly, immediately, we're seeing a boost in our metabolic rate, right? The effect on our metabolic rate. If you're a police officer standing there pointing, you're just standing in an intersection pointing places. You're directing traffic 2.5 times. You're resting metabolic rate. Childcare and you're standing. That's 3 times because I don't know, children, they're terrible, right? I don't know, you're standing in church, that's 2. I don't know, maybe that's more calm than standing elsewhere, volunteer activities. And ambulatory activity. You're no longer just standing. Now you're walking. You're walking somewhere. And horse racing, walking as an occupation. Okay, I don't know, 3.8. And moderate effort farming, 4.8. All right, we're getting up there. Golf, you're walking and carrying clubs. You're way down a little bit, 4.3. Pushing a stroller, 4.0. I don't know what that water walking is, but somewhere between 2.5 and 6.8, depending how vigorous your water walking is. There's a question in the comment box. What does NEAT stand for? Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So exercise is go to the gym. NEAT is like you're standing around, walking around, weeding. You're just the daily activity. It's physical activity that's not like done in a gym, where you're deliberately exercising for the purpose of caloric consumption. It's not that. Now, more ambulatory activities, just depending on the intensity of walking. Here's, 2.5 miles an hour. All right, 3.0. 5 miles an hour to 3% grade. That's about 10 times your resting metabolism. That's really getting going there. More walking, right? Walking to and from an outhouse, that's only 2.5. Walking for pleasure. You think there'd be some urgency with the outhouse? If you're going to use an outhouse, you got a need to go. Otherwise, you just hold it. So that was weird. Who did they measure to get this? Like what gas analysis did they do on somebody walking to and from an outhouse? Walking in church versus walking out of church, whatever. More intense non-exercise activity, thermogenesis. And this is a big one, right? Forestry, 17.5 times your resting metabolism. You're 51 axe blows a minute. You're chopping down a tree. I would always walk by campus at Pacific if I have to go to my office, and there's that parking lot that's, I don't know, it's out in front of the WPC. And you're facing the WPC, the front door of the WPC, and you look left and you see a parking lot, and beyond the parking lot is like the softball field and stuff. And I always wondered, how long would it take the police to show up if I just showed up at that? Because there's like 30 trees, little deciduous trees growing in the middle of the parking lot. And like, how long would it take the police to show up if I just went over there with an axe and just started chopping them down? Just one after another. I just start chopping down trees. Could I finish the parking lot? Could I get through all of those trees in the parking lot before the police come up to stop me? And I was thinking about the compendium, like 51 axe blows a minute. That's less than a minute a tree. I don't know if I can maintain that, but how long is it going to take? And then I've been thinking about this for like 6 months, and then I walked by campus a few days ago, and all the trees were chopped down. Somebody like went with an axe and chopped them all down. I don't know what they're doing to the parking lot. They must be building something there or whatever, but I think they would have let me get away with it. So getting into more intense stuff, right here, 23 times your resting metabolism running at 14 miles an hour. So this idea of a 30% boost, when people say, oh, smoking, 30% boost, that's generous, right? It's probably 10%, it might be 5%, but let's say it's 30%. Okay, well, this is a 23-fold increase, running at 14 miles an hour. So smoking, who cares about smoking, right? Now, physical activity is so important, and the way we perceive people who do physical activity, the way we look at people and judge them, that's human beings. That's what really it's on some level, like, are you judging me? Well, that's all we do is judge. We look at the lion and say, is that thing, if I try to pet it, is it going to bite my hand? Is that a poisonous snake? Oh, really all we do in life is judge, and that's how we're alive. But we have to be cautious in judging, profiling of other people. And we do that a lot with body composition. We do this a ton with body composition. Now, over here on the right is Covert Bailey, famous book called Fit or Fat. It's a dichotomous like variable here. It's one or the other. This is binary. You're either fit or you are fat. There's no link in the two. That's false. That's not how it works, right? You can carry, to be the healthiest BMI to have is, a tiny bit overweight. That's the healthiest place to be when you look at epidemiological, population-based studies and who lives the longest and stuff. I mean, and but this concept of fitness and fatness, right? This is the perceptions, and this book is just funny, but it's perceptions of thin and heavier set folks, right? The fatty puffs and the thinifers, and this would be a fatty puff, and that would be a thinifer. And there's this guy Edmund, I think this is Edmund right here, and Terry, they're brothers. Edmund and Terry are brothers, and they go down. You don't need to know anything about this, but it's a perception of this came out in France in 1930 or so, and a decade later in the US, the translation came out. And it's sort of famous book a long time ago. It's not one that's going to be made into a Disney movie because it's just like so offensive. But they go down this long escalator, and at the bottom of the escalator, into this underworld, at the bottom of the escalator, they board these boats, and they go sent off to the Fatty Puff Kingdom. And Edmund goes to the Fatty Puff Kingdom, and the Thinifer Republic. And then these two, the Fatty Puff Kingdom is like everybody's perceived as lazy with a sweet tooth, and they just get what's coming to them. I mean, that's really how the perception of this book in the 30s. And in the Thinifer Republic, everybody is these energetic sort of workhorses, just these like workaholic, energetic people, compared to the gluttonous, lazy people who sit around all the time. And then they become these people, right? The brothers become like administrators in their separate lands, and then they go to war, and the Thinifers win. And then the Thinifers like, man, you guys, gluttony is the way of life. I get it. I see why you're doing all this. And they kind of meet in the middle, and who cares? But perceptions that we have, just like look to literature or look to, I don't know, social networking or something. The perceptions that we have of people are not accurate, right? This isn't like, oh, you're lazy and hungry, right? Oh, you work really hard. Nah, it's not really. It's just hormones, right? It's just a bunch of hormones. And can you manipulate the hormones? Yes, you can manipulate these things. Now, there are genetic variables, and there are definitely behavioral variables that are in play. So this one, James Levine, he's, again, huge researcher. Just because this is like a book for the common folk, he's a massive researcher. So he conducted an overfeeding study, and everybody ate in excess of 1,000 calories a day. And some people gained weight, not everybody. What explains the difference? People gained weight and other people didn't. Why? What explains that difference? And it's mostly a matter of physical activity. Right. And so the magic underwear study, the same author did this one, and magic underwear is what he called it. But they wore this underwear that was like an accelerometer, sort of a Fitbit of underwear. And it captured everything. It captured every motion that they're doing every half second. And no differences in dietary intake. They totally controlled everything everybody was eating, but they had this underwear accelerometer that they're wearing that measures everything. And then what they found was the obese people were sitting a lot longer. Now, what causes what, right? So you can't just say a lack of physical activity is the cause of obesity, because it can also go the other way around. I have, hormonal problems, and I'm exhausted, and I have my post Thanksgiving syndrome all day long, and I just got to sit down. I succumb to this. And so there's a number of explanations, but physical activity, in particular, NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is the big difference. It's not how much people exercise, like 45 minutes or something. Okay, now you got 23 hours and 15 minutes. What else did you do? Well, that was filled with sitting, or that was filled with NEAT, right? That's really what's going to determine weight differences in people. And a lot of that is a consequence and plays into endocrine problems. So if you consider skeletal muscle, if a bicep or a thigh or whatever wants nourishment, it has to work for it. So think about the heart. If you are just standing there, you're in the choir, you're in a wedding, you're in whatever, your knees are locked, and you're just standing there, you're not getting all that blood back into the heart, right? The tissues, I mean, eventually you're just going to pass out, right? The tissues need use to drive blood back to the heart, the skeletal muscle pump. There's all these valves. Blood pressure is so low, it's not going to go against gravity. So what you need to do is flex the calves and the quads and the glutes and whatever. And if you stand up and you get lightheaded, start flexing stuff. Flex your glutes and calves and quads and hamstrings. Start flexing stuff. Skeletal muscle pump. You're going to drive that blood back into the heart. So you're going to get some preload and a better squeeze, a better systole following a better preload. And that Frank Starling mechanism, right? You're going to get a stronger contraction, better cardiac output, better beats if you can fill it up in advance. And so the muscle has to work for it. If the muscle wants blood flow, flex, squeeze, get that blood back into the heart, and then the heart will work a little bit harder when it has blood. The total cardiac output will increase. Now, think about, we talked about this one earlier. Think about your pancreas. If you eat and sit down, insulin has to do all the work for you, and insulin sucks. It has to do all of the work for you, and it's not effective, and you're going to get insulin sensitivity problems, and it's just stores. It doesn't burn the carbs. It shoves into the cells, and it turns on glycogen synthase to synthesize glycogen. So you're just going to store stuff. Very anabolic with fat too. But if you exercise, if you move and then eat, what's going to happen is you get AMPK, adenosine monophosphate, AMP, activated protein kinase. What does that do? Insulin's job, but way better, right? So it mobilizes GLUT4 without the use of insulin. So you get GLUT4, that glucose transporter to the surface to bring sugar into the cell. But then instead of turning on glycogen synthase to just start linking all that glucose, storing it as glycogen, what it does is activates hexokinase and phosphofructokinase. Those are both enzymes, particularly important regulatory enzymes in glycolysis. So you shove a bunch of sugar into the cell and then you consume it, you burn it. That's what AMPK does. And how are you going to activate AMPK? Exercise. Go move. Go get a bunch of moving. Go for your walk and go for your jog and whatever. And you're going to get a bunch of AMPK activity. And so if the muscle wants a bunch of sugar, work for it. Work for it, and you'll get that sugar really well. If you don't work for it, you're going to get a loan from insulin, and then it's going to be asking for interest later because you're going to get insulin sensitivity problems. Now, what about total blood flow? Not just the heart itself is going to work better when the muscle is working, but the vasculature, right? When you start exercising, you vasodilate to the muscles that are working. You don't vasodilate to the areas that aren't working. It's not like, well, I'm doing squats, so I better get my delts, send some more blood to my delts. You don't do that, right? You vasoconstrict to certain areas, you vasodilate to certain areas, certainly to your guts, right? Splanchnic blood flow really vasoconstricts. What determines vasodilation? It's a bunch of metabolic byproducts of muscle use, right? So it's hydrogen ions. This is going to come from ATP hydrolysis, right? That's one of the byproducts of ATP hydrolysis. Lactate from glycolysis, adenosine and prostaglandins. And prostaglandins are this fatty acid that get released during tissue damage. They live in the cell wall. That phospholipid bilayer of muscle. You have your arachidonic acid actually is what gets released and it gets converted into prostaglandin. So it's a marker of muscle use. You're using a bunch of muscle, especially if you're using that muscle hard, right? You're using it hard, you're gonna release a lot more arachidonic acid and thus get more prostaglandin. So these things are all determining, these byproducts of muscle action are determining where the blood flow should go, right? Okay, send me more blood, I'm being used. I'll take care of the sugar uptake myself because I want to use it appropriately. I don't want your loan. You're a loan shark. You're going to kill me later if I use you. You're going to come back with a hammer and break my knees because I wasn't able to pay you back. And I'll take care of glucose uptake myself. And let me also lend a hand to the heart. Let me help usher blood back to the heart so it can pump better, so that my total cardiac output increases, and I'm going to redirect a bunch of that to me. Muscles earn their keep. Skeletal muscle earns the food it gets with motion. And if it doesn't, it's bad, right? It's a problem if it's not doing that. And we should do the same thing. We should behave as physiology does, right? Evolution has had a long time to figure out how best to connect movement and sustenance. Evolution has taken a really long time to figure out the optimal course. Why don't we behave accordingly? That would be the best way of doing things. Now, when we stop using skeletal muscle, right? When we stop exercising, we stop playing our sports. Like you're a tennis player, a swimmer, a hockey player, a basketball player, you're a weightlifter, you're a runner, and you stop doing your thing. What happens to the skeletal muscle, right? Atrophy sets in faster than we think. Remember, you're only really paying attention to the last few days of what your exercise routine has been. Now, if you've been overreaching, you're going to need to take some days off, right? If you're in functional overreaching, all right, it's Monday. I'll see you next Monday. Just get out of here. You're a weak ass today. It's just going to be worse on Tuesday. It's going to be worse on Wednesday. It's going to be worse on Thursday. This isn't good. Go home. You might come back the next Monday even stronger. That's fine. But a lot of adaptations, we start paying attention to the last few days. If you do some bed rest, right? You get injured, you get the flu, you get super depressed, you quarantine confines you to bed, whatever it is. We see this rate of all these studies looking at sedentary behavior for 10 to 42 days. You're seeing like 0.5% of your total muscle mass every single day just vanishes. Half a percent. That's a lot. Okay, that is a lot. 0.5% a day. A day, right? And then that's not the end of it. That's not performance. That's not where performance stops, right? The buck keeps moving there. And so you see this neuromuscular decline also. Neuromuscular recruitment gets compromised. And so you have net muscle loss. The actual physical tissue starts to deteriorate in a hurry. And the function, the recruitment characteristics, your ability to control that muscle also starts disappearing. Atrophy really sets in quickly and badly. And so this is just a bunch of different studies looking at it, the duration of disuse, whether it's immobilization or bed rest, and muscle loss per day. And so, 4 days and 2.3% per day in immobilization. And looking at a lot of these different studies, what they're finding. Now, there are ways to preserve this. Let's say you're an athlete and you get injured, and you're not supposed to panic in this moment, because if you panic, all right, now you're just going to get a bunch of cortisol, and cortisol is catabolic, and you're just worsening things. There's supplements you can take, leucine and HMB, hydroxymethylbutyrate, that can ward off some of that degradation. There's stuff that can be done, but the best thing that can be done, and there's studies that look at those things. There's a study on HMB and bed rest, and it was a placebo-controlled trial, and over the week of bed rest or whatever it was, people lost like 4 pounds of muscle, or they lost 0.5 pound of muscle, something like that. You can look up the study and find the exact values of it, but it was, maybe it was 10 days of bed rest and 4.5 pounds of muscle, of like lean tissue that was lost. But in the HMB group, that was in the placebo group. In the HMB group, you saved a few of those pounds. There's things that can be done. But the point of that is that sedentary behavior gets the best of us in a hurry, and the best of us is a lot bigger than we think. Now, as we age and life becomes more sedentary and park benches become more inviting, we're really going to deteriorate. Now, this is from the book. You don't know any of this stuff, but James Levine asks these questions about, do you work seated on a chair? Have you ever shopped on the internet? Who doesn't in the age of quarantine? Do you watch TV for 1 hour a day or more? Do you ever eat while watching TV or in the car? Have you ever internet dated? Do you own a recliner? He just kind of goes through all of these things and then says, here's your score, right? 9 to 10. This is, I hate holic as a component of any diagnosis. But chair in prison, chair addict, it's cute. This is a little cute thing, but this idea of one activity is not the next, and exercise isn't the solution. Neat is really a better solution. So bringing back this Katie Bowman quotation of, in the same way, supplements should not be the bulk of your diet, exercise should not be the bulk of your movement profile. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis is the major difference between body compositions, other than just straight up hormonal dysfunction. And hormones are really, this is your big culprit. But out of what you can control, NEAT is so much more important than exercise. Exercise matters. Exercise is important, but it's not the whole picture. So if you just think, this is my list of where do we burn our calories, right? Do you wash clothes on a washboard? Do you grind coffee by hand? Do you wind your clocks? Do you go to the library for things? Do you carry wood and coal to heat your house? Do you get water from a well? How far away is that well? Do you have to make a fire to heat that water? Do you light candles in that fire to see at night? Do you milk your own cows? Climb banana trees for carbs? Like, what is it that you do? Well, I shop on Amazon and Vitacost, and I sit on my computer. That's what we do today, and we've published in Uganda databases where we're looking at physical activity in Uganda. And do you own a car? Do you own a fridge? Do you own a bicycle? And sort of behavioral, because in Uganda people are kind of spaced out, and there's different levels of sort of first, second, and third world all in one country, and so you can isolate different areas of Uganda, and it's just like people decay. You stop doing these things, and we decay, and we have to reintroduce them somehow. We have to supplement our day with NEAT, even though it doesn't call for it. So this is a study. It's an old one. 2002 is a really good one, but it's an old one that we're expending about 38% of the calories that we're meant to. If we follow the guidelines for physical activity that are established, ACSM, everyone has guidelines for physical activity, we're still less than half of the daily caloric expense that we would expect from our genes. So, the lack of stress, the quizzing yourself stuff, these people, these sorts of questions, what transmembrane proteins are, the cadherins and integrins are transmembrane proteins and cross membranes. Angular specificity to illustrate specificity of adaptation, the types of tissues that are going to adapt, heart rate response during stress. So what happens during stress to heart and blood pressure, and where blood glows and where blood glows, and what happens to glucose. And then it's really good to be able to look at some case studies and identify, do these people have risk factors? Are they high, low, or moderate risk? And we're not going to do that now, but is Gandalf or Dumbledore, who's worse? Stephen Colbert, let's do him. And there's Batman and Captain America and Wolverine and Quagmire and this lady. So these all upload this thing, and you can pause on these slides, but we can also go through them together if you like. But it's good to know the risk factors that people have. How dangerous is it to prescribe intense exercise? One of the things you can tell people is just go get a bunch of NEAT, go get a bunch of non-exercise activity thermogenesis things. My meeting started 18 minutes ago. Questions? We're done with physical inactivity. We'll do injuries, and then we'll start moving on to environmental things. Is that us? The silence is time to log off.
I have a question, actually.
Okay, yeah.
So about like atrophy and disuse, I know like some coaches like after seasons, right? They'll say like, oh, take a few week downtime or whatever. And I like follow some like athletes on Instagram that after a season they'll take like a month off or something without working out at all, right? How bad is that, or how much does that set them back, not only in their training, but I guess like with health after taking on training for all the like 9 months and then taking
Yeah,
a month off?
really good question. With athletes, it should be well periodized. You should do periodization. And when you do that, because there's just so many different seasons, the preseason and certainly that early season is a very different set of exposures than kind of the middle season and the postseason, the playoffs, whatever, and the off season. I mean, there's just all these different phases. And if you periodize right, you really shouldn't need a bunch of time off. Go take at least a week, no more than a month. But if you're erring on the side of a week, if you periodized it right, where your stress load isn't excessive, if the coaching wasn't bad, right, you shouldn't need a month off. Maybe if the conditions of performance were extreme and the body is really you're in overreaching and you're right on that brink of overtraining, go take your month off because that's the safest thing. You're going to recover endocrinologically, where you're going to your hypothalamic fill in the blank axis is going to be a lot healthier at the end of that month than it was before. And you can just measure cortisol levels. You can do your saliva. I mean, you can measure cortisol all over the place. And you shouldn't need a month, though. That probably means there's an excess load throughout the course of the season. And when people get into the sort of latter half of the season, they really should be backing off in the weight room and not doing much. Expose the high threshold motor units to a load, but none of this break down the tissue, tons of eccentric loading. I did like German volume training, 10 sets of 10 on Saturday. I'm like, oh, that's way too much stress. We should be doing exposing tissue to high thresholds, right? Activate those highest threshold motor units, the 2Xs, whatever. And in the interest of preservation, to try to preserve those tissues. And then take a week off, take 2 weeks off. And if you're taking more off than that, that is probably an inappropriate season.
Yeah, so for like on the performance side, right, like a week or two doesn't make much of a difference. But then how about then from like the stress of inactivity of health, like from a health perspective?
Yeah, it depends. It depends what you're doing. You or your teammates or whoever it is, what they're doing during that time off. If you're physically active, now a lot of these atrophy studies, they're looking at like bed rest. Head down, tilt, bed rest, or some sort of immobilization, and so this is a more extreme version of nothing. It's good to take downtime. Every once in a while. I mean, you really should just take a day every week of just nothing. Just have your dead day, have your nothing day, and take a week every once in a while to have your dead day, your dead week, your nothing week, and you're not going to atrophy during that time. If it's a month, maybe you'll lose a little bit of tissue, something like that. But during that month, if like, well, I'll play a pickup game of basketball once or twice. I went for a couple of jogs. I did do, a few sets in the weight room now and again, but for the most part, I was just resting. That's a little bit different. If you want optimal rest, take that week off and then reintroduce yourself slowly.
You're talking about the like half percentage of muscle mass loss per day. We're talking about that with you're talking about bed restricted patients or bed restricted people. So what about like the people who are, I'm talking about like during quarantine where they're in the bed most of the day, they get up to go to the fridge and take a shit or whatever and then go home, go back to their bed. Like what's
it's going to be pretty close. It's not going to be quite, but I'm interested to see. There must be studies that are going to come out. Yeah. And we could do it too with Fit3D or something and just look at people pre and post, because we have all these values recorded of pre-quarantine. Let's just go, I'll get all those same people and just get post-quarantine, and let's take a look at what that looks like. And so I think a lot of studies will come out. All I have is a hunch, which is going to be just cut the number in half and it's still pretty big. And that's a loose hunch with a broad standard deviation, but it is going to be more rapid, and muscle will vanish faster than people think. Just think about this idea of basal metabolism. It's expensive. Why is it expensive? Well, your brain is super expensive. Your central nervous system. All right, there goes, a fifth of all of your daily calories. But outside of that, skeletal muscle is it's so expensive. And if you, like, let's say your cost of living is $2,000 a month between rent and like a car payment and insurance and everything, food and cell phone and cable and like the whatever internet and stuff. Everything combined is $2,000 a month. And then you just like, it's too much, right? It's just like, oh, okay, it's time to downsize. What's really expensive here? Well, the house costs the most. Okay, let's just say that's like central nervous system or something. I guess I'll keep that. But then what's the second biggest thing? The car payment and the gas and car insurance. Okay, I don't drive anywhere. It's quarantine. I'm gonna sell my car and just enough with car payments and enough with all this stuff. I'm gonna save that money. That's sort of getting rid of muscle. You're just downsizing and trying to have a healthier budget just in case it needs something. So that's the philosophical perspective. The physiological perspective, I'm not sure the percentage. 0.25% a day. I mean, it's gonna be kind of big.
So then with that, like, same idea, right? You get rid of the car if you're not paying for it. If you're like, like, let's say, I don't know, like some bodybuilder, and then all of a sudden quarantine hits, you have no gym access. So now you're just at home. Your basal metabolic rate is probably a little higher because you have all right, but it won't slow down right away, right? So is that like also a bad thing then, that you're burning more calories than I guess you need to be doing nothing?
No,
Or-
it's nice. It's nice to have a high basal metabolic rate, because it's not going to crash right away. It'll coast, and then some wind resistance, right? It'll start to fall back to the earth, and but as you acclimate to a sedentary life, the muscle starts to go, basal metabolism starts to fall, and you don't see it in the mirror from one day to the next. Atrophy is invisible if you see yourself every day. If you look in the mirror one day, you lie in bed for 2 weeks, and you look at yourself when you wake up. You're in a coma for 2 weeks, and you wake up and go look at yourself. That's visible. I mean, where did I go? But day to day, just like the rate of aging, go look in the mirror and then look in the mirror tomorrow, and you're the same person. So aging doesn't exist. Nah, it exists. You just don't see it in the increments. If you see yourself often enough, aging is invisible in those increments that we see it. It's the same thing with atrophy, but it actually is pretty quick. The main thing is just to hit those high threshold motor units and give yourself the signal that, hey, I need these things. If you use it, like, look at an old, like, I don't know, some old neighbors, something, your grandparents, go find your grandparents and do a muscle biopsy. What do they have in there? It's all type 1s. They're just a big body of abs, right? They don't have, I mean, they're postural. It's like a postural muscle. It's just all type 1 fibers, because they haven't used their type 2 fibers since the last time they were like at a dance, and they're 80 years old. I don't know when the last time they used their type 2 fibers was, unless they're farmers. But sort of sedentary old people, they're just all type 1 fibers. And so selective atrophy and sort of disintegration of the human form is not indiscriminate. It's very specific to what you're not using. Use it or lose it. Anything else? All right. All right, I'll see you guys on Friday, and we'll talk about some injuries and adaptations to injuries and what happens.
For sure. All right, everybody.
All right, JP, I'll stick around.